time just seems to be now flying by, and so much of my time seems to be sort of irrelevant in the sense that I'm doing stuff that I have to do as opposed to stuff that I want to do or feel any value from. But I've got to make a living and I've got to, pay the bills and stuff like that. Live for the weekends, really. I go pretty much every weekend, and sometimes Eva joins me, sometimes not. She's got her own, obviously, businesses and things, but doesn't really matter. I still go out, and I always think to myself, why am I doing this? What on earth am I thinking? I'm spending all. Eva asked me this weekend, how many miles do you think you've hiked? How many miles do you think you've driven? And we did a bit of a back of the envelope calculation. And we came to the conclusion that I may have hiked somewhere around 2,000 kilometers, maybe more. And I've certainly driven probably 10, 15,000 kilometers over the last couple of years, just following these lines. And so, you start to think to yourself, why am I so obsessed? And do I have to keep doing this? Maybe I should be doing something else by now. But when you keep finding new things and you keep finding new detail that you didn't see before, and as we were just talking, when you start realizing that somehow the journey is not just across the landscape or within yourself, but it also seems to be connecting to the archetypes behind the culture of the land, then the mystery broadens and deepens to the point where you just can't give it up, because I need to know what the hell is going on. Why is this happening?
Gary, you're in the wonderland for dowsing. No one else is doing this, and you have the most beautiful scenery and landscapes, and your immersion into the land and what it's offering you is the real treasure, because it's giving back to you what you find and what you observe, and there's this two-way relationship which is deepening. I love reading your reports and can't wait for the book to come out. But yes, getting into the archetypes of who you really are and what the land is trying to almost transform you into. I mentioned earlier about the strangeness of Ireland and the deep spirituality they had now really entered into with the land there, much probably because of the rather abrupt ending of their relationship with religion, and the need to have some sort of connection to the land. And it was deep within them. In fact, the one thing about Ireland was that it's been so recent, in as much as that they still remember all the myths, they talk about them, the stories are all there, and in most countries they're lost. So your own and Eva's land there, it's going to have all those myths and legends which will evoke new emotional responses within you, deep within you, that probably that will reawaken memories from past souls. And so you may wonder why you're drawn to it. Well, there's every inch of your being being drawn to it. Yes. And what wonderful treasures you're finding. That's just, I mean, I literally, I'm lucky to find a church. But look at what you've got.
Well, it's all new territory to some extent. I remember 2 years ago, I was on my own and I was pushing out towards the German border, tracking the line on a week-long holiday. And I came over the hill, and just the tower of that Hluboka fairy tale castle was poking out in the distance. And I had never seen that castle before. And I was gobsmacked, to use a Yorkshire expression, I guess. And the closer we got, the more magical this thing seemed. So, going back a couple of weekends ago with Evo, it was like a rediscovery of that journey, because we accidentally found ourselves on the same road. And I said, look, I need to get video of this, because this is what I saw 2 years ago. And it really, this emerging fairy tale castle, and realizing that the line was going to go through it, if not node at it, was also the other thing. It was like, wow, this castle, then you do some research into its history, And you discover that it again has a connection to the Lords of Hradec, which are the people that the sort of aristocratic family in Yindriku Hradec that formed the sort of relationship with the Templars in the first place. And this is what you keep finding. You keep finding the historical connection to these locations, to this family and the Templars and that kind of thing. But then we get to the castle, and Eva's so sensitive, she doesn't need sticks at all. And we're walking around the castle. I've got my rod out, trying to map it. And she says to me, oh, the energy here is amazing. Come over here. And of course, that was a node on one side of the castle. And then I was telling her, I was like, well, I don't get it, because if we're mapping the lines into the castle and I've mapped them out the other side, there shouldn't be a node here because they're coming in the same, right? So if they're noding here, that means I've got something wrong. I must have got the polarities wrong coming in or going out. So I said, let's do a bit more digging around, because I need to figure out what I've got wrong here. And of course, we walked to the other side of the castle, and I suddenly realized there's another node here, and I'm following my stick, and I'm taking like the footpath, and I'm following the stick to where the node is, because maths where the node is. When I got there, Eva's already laid down like this. It's here. And that's when we realized, there's a node either side of the castle. So the lines come in and go out the same way, but they do a lot in between. And then, to our utter amazement, when we went down into the square, and we were going to have we had a blueberry dessert with ice cream. And we went down into the square, and there was a church there. So I was looking at the church, a line went through the church. And next to it was this huge boulder with a flat top. And there was no explanation of why it's there. It's just stuck there in the middle of this square. When I do the proper video on the place, you'll see it. And in the square are two sets of concentric rings with like an interference pattern. Yeah, exactly. And I said to everyone, I said, this is weird. Well, what's this? Is there any signage? And we looked around, there's no signage at all. And I took photographs and video of it, and we're walking away, and all of a sudden I turned around and I said, but Eva, it's the two nodes at either side of the castle. That's what it is. It's a representation of the two nodes, And then you think to yourself, well, who put this here? And for what purpose? And who carved the circles in it? And why did they build the castle here? It's like...
You can get curious, because what we must keep remembering that what we're measuring is a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
And I've been to a place in Wiltshire, I won't mention where there's always been a node, and yet I've taken groups there and found that one node became three, and I was thinking, what's going on? And it was weaving like that.
Yeah.
And that was 3 nodes within 100 meters. Subsequently, I found that it's been up to 5 nodes over about 200 meters, and then it goes back to 3 and then 1 node over a course of about 2 months. And that I have no idea why it does that.
Is that related to the what else is going on with the lines in terms of them, the frequency of their movement? I know this is why they're tied down.
No, because it gets a bit more bizarre, and I was going to talk about this in our sort of conference for dowsers later in the year, but just for the dowsing community. But it gets a bit more because when you separate out the nodes separate out the actual different types of energy lines that node there. So you have a node with just the type 3s, then a node with the type 2s, and then a node with the type 1s. It's like, and then they phase back in again. There's something that I've always thought the lines teach us and the nodes teach us, and I keep wondering whether or not this weaving like this is they're trying to get our attention about how important weaving of the energies is. I may not be right, but I only mentioned it because the fact that you saw a cross in and cross out, that could have been in the middle of going to 3 nodes and then back to 1 node afterwards, and the 1 node might be in the tower next time you go there.
So I did a Hamish and I tried to figure out if there was any pattern inside the node, and I found I definitely found the pattern, and the pattern was the same, seemed to be the same in both the nodes, which seemed to confirm to me that it was, you know, Templar line, both Templar line nodes, and not two
Oh,
different
I'm sure you're right.
lines.
They were the same lines crossing over.
Yeah, yeah,
I would say, well, you could do it remotely. Actually, you could check whether or not they're still crossed over
yeah,
into, or
yeah.
whether they've gone back to one, or even whether they've gone to three. Even.
Do you think it's got anything to do with all of the sort of solar activity that's happening right now? I mean, have you seen, we saw the lines broaden. I remember the morning when I got up and there was a message from you saying, have you checked the lines recently? And I went outside and went, wow, they've grown in width, which is obviously what your point was. They haven't
I
grown in
haven't.
width since,
Over
but
the last 3 weeks, I haven't seen much of an increase in width, and I've been running dowsing courses in Bath, and I check widths all the time with them. So it's been a bit steady now for a few months.
yeah,
I think maybe about 3 months ago we had a last slight increase, but it hasn't been very much. So I don't think the sun's influencing the width at the moment. But I don't have an answer for as to why they're weaving, or why they're noding more just yet. Because although I think they're vibrations, I think they're linked to the universal consciousness in some way, and that we're going through this transformation, and we're being taught how to come to terms with our who we are really, and the importance of the land. I think is what's really beginning to come home to me. And I think you've interested in your earlier words. You're experiencing the same. How it's transforming us
yeah,
through what it's leading us to, what it's making us think, and what it's teaching us is just because we're immersing ourselves into the land and the spirituality that has always been there,
yeah,
but we've just switched off from it. And I think just getting back to nature, and I probably a decade ago this may not have happened so much, but right now getting back to nature and being on the lines and finding the nodes is and communicating with nature and the animals and all that, and being aware of that, greater awareness of it is having a much greater transformative effect on any of us now than it ever would have done in the past. And you touched on the myths and legends, and
yeah.
that's something I hadn't really appreciated the significance of until I went to do my talks in Ireland, and listened to the power of the stories that they all the speakers were just talking about the stories of which brought back memories of not just the past life on the land, but the memories of past lives of humans, the difficulties that we all went through in the past, the psychic wounds of the difficulties of living back then, and how the stories
Mm.
gave them courage to it would give them the willpower to continue. All these things that the stories would do, which in a similar way, I think the Native American Indians in America, they didn't. Although they had stories, I think they used objects more, and they had the power of objects, which gave them the same sort of strength. But and that may have been just a different way to do the same thing. But
Well, as I said, it's kind of interesting because I'm obviously, I mean, this time around, I'm an Englishman, a Yorkshireman, working class guy from Hull, you know. So to be sitting in a Slavic country and connecting with the Slavic deities and the Slavic mythology of, and let's face it, the Slavic deities are they're very cosmic. They're basically elemental forces typified, and they're very cosmic. So the story of Perun, the sky god, and Veles, the god of the underworld, is at either end of an oak tree. The world tree is one of the seasons and night and day. It's light and darkness, but not darkness in the sense of evil, but just the polarity of light and dark. And then you bring in, Perun's basically, well, Veles climbs the tree and steals Perun's wife, sheep, or children, depending on which version of the myth. Perun gets angry and shoots his lightning bolts at Veles, who is sometimes seen as a dragon or a serpent or a, you know, that kind of a, and that's why you have these images in Slavic depictions of these two gods of what actually looks like a knight in armor and a dragon. So it looks like St. George and the Dragon, but actually it's Perun and Veles. And then the goddesses, I don't think that anybody on the Slavic side would ever talk about, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've never seen any writings about the female goddess being a three-part goddess, Maiden, Mother, Crone. But I definitely see Maiden, Mother, Crone, because you've got Vesna, who's the young goddess of spring. You've got Merkosh, who's the mother goddess. And then you've got Morana, who's the goddess of death and winter, but she's the crone, right? She's typified as a crone. So you've got the three-part female deity, and you've got the bipolar male deities. And it's all about the land. It's all about the cosmic nature of what we go through. And I think it's almost as if, like you say, it's drawing my attention anyway to the fact that this natural pulse, this natural cycle, this natural what the earth goes through is important, and we've lost connections with it. And it's reminding you, you know, pay more attention to what's going on in terms of these cycles and how they develop and the importance of these cycles.
And the symbolism that you're being shown too. I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking of the Egyptian gods and goddesses, and Nut and Apep, or Apop is the snake. Nut is the sky goddess, and there is a similar story being represented in many different cultures, and it's no coincidence that it's all reappearing now. And we're learning about it again now, because the symbolism is there for us to interpret and to realize, actually, no, we're going through this again. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, there's all kinds of other stuff that just continues to amuse me, which is, it's not complete 100%, but I think I've told you this before. Whenever I'm on a type 4 line, depending on the polarity of the line, the church will be dedicated to a male or female deity or saint. So if it's a positive line, it will be Saint Christopher, Saint John, John the Baptist. If it's a negative line, it will be Mary, it will be Saint Barbara, something. And the only exception to that is quite often these sort of nondescript, like descriptions of a dedication of a church to like the Sacred Heart or some concept as opposed to a being personified, will also fall on a negative female type line. And this is 99.9% of the time. And I was really annoyed because a few weeks ago I was dowsing a different line, and the line seemed to me to be negative, but the church was dedicated to a male saint. And I was quite utterly distraught by this because it broke the rule. Yeah.
Yes.
And then I got home and started to research the location that I'd been to, and discovered that in fact the church was built on another church which was previously dedicated to Mary. So it held true.
Well done. It was like you were given that whole thing to explore, to say, no, you are right. I mean, just to don't be put off by this, you know.
Well, this is what the other thing is. I mean, you know me, I think, reasonably well. I think it's obvious I'm an impatient sort of person. You know, I'm always pushing and wanting to get on and get things done. But what this work is also teaching me is patience, because as I go out and I do the dowsing and I do the mapping and I find multiple lines passing through a town, and you know, you start to get an impression of what's going on. And then you come home and you try to work that out on a map, and you think, hang on a minute, this can't be right. I must have missed something. So I have to go back again to solve the problem. And I always say I go and solve the problem, but find 3 more. And so eventually you realize you've just got to be patient, and you've got to wait to be shown the full picture. Because you're never shown the full picture. You're always shown an aspect of it. And then you have to struggle through and work to find the full picture. And you have to be patient to allow them to reveal what the full picture is. And this is something else that I find quite amusing about this, you know, dowsing.
It's also, I remember back the times when I was going through this with my mapping project in Wiltshire, and there were days that just it wasn't going well, and very often it's because I wasn't in the right state of mind as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a number of times I used to take my dog, my boxer dog Louis, with me, and the ridiculous thing was that more often than not he would shake me out of my mood and get me into that sort of the positive frame of mind. And then as soon as that my own frame of mind had changed, then it all began to become clearer.
I completely understand that. When I went on my 1 week trip this summer, I went out to the other border, and I think you probably read one of my notes about the first couple of days. I went back to the last place that we'd been really tracking the line, not Versettin, but further in towards Brunmo, out by Hosteen. And I spent a day really not, I couldn't even dowse. I just felt like I was useless, and I got very frustrated. And I even called my daughter and said, I'm coming home tonight. I'm not going to camp out. I can't, I'm not in the right mood. I feel lonely. I feel frustrated. My daughter said to me, she said, no, don't come home, Dad. Just go and find some company. Instead of camping in the van, try and find a hotel or something with a bar and talk to some people. So in the end, she convinced me, and I ended up finding the hotel above the campsite that I'd stayed at the previous night, the same location, Rusava, Hotel Rusava. And to my utter amazement, there was a meeting there of English teachers in the Czech Republic, and so I spent a great night in the bar chatting to all these people because everybody spoke English, and the next day I got up and I felt, obviously, other than a slight hangover, I felt much better. And I thought to myself, you know what, why am I hanging around here? What I really need to do is get further out on the line, go back to Versettin, where we found that wonderful node that we fixed on the hilltop there, and try to figure out where it goes. I don't understand why I'm still holding back. So I drove out to Versettin, and as I'm driving in from a different direction. As I'm driving in, I'm on the motorway, and it passes a river. And in the river, I'm thinking, there's all these strange stone designs in the river. So I thought, well, that looks intriguing. So I parked the car. I got underneath the bridge there, and I parked the car. And I found basically male, female, female, male type 4 lines. And in the female lines, someone put all these stone pillars. I think I probably showed you a photograph. And this was like a sign to me, okay, fine. I'm finally doing something, I'm back on the path, and I'm able to get on with this now. Whatever it was, I've broken through the malaise and the negative.
But this is twice you've said something now, which is, to me, it's like Scottish second sight, because you've said, I found something intriguing, and you were talking about the church before, and you just suddenly appeared, and I thought that's not just, you've not just seen this church, it's this fairy castle. It's like it's done a double take. It's like a second sight. Something's like, hang on a minute, it's not a castle. It's something's drawing me towards it. And now you just mentioned it again. What we just said is you just saw some stones in the river.
Yeah.
And as a geologist, just if someone says to me, "Oh, I saw some stones in the river," it doesn't bat an eyelid on me. I'm stoned out with stones. And yet you've just said, "I saw some stones in the river that intrigued me." Well, that was because you had that second sight, that knowing, and that intuition there is very much linked to your persona and your mood. So that when you've switched that on, you're catching these things, and I think that's something which the forests teach you, the woods teach you, the landscape teaches you, because your eyes are drawn in that sense of awareness and aware mode to what they're supposed to be drawn to, and things that you may laugh, as I used to call geology degrees in colouring in, and you'll know what I mean. But talking about, I spent half my time colouring something in order to hand in the work. But one thing it did teach me, and I'm sure you is this, that as a geologist, with all the microscopy work that we used to do, your eyes are drawn to what's different. You can tell, exactly it's a type of granite, but unless you find a particular crystal in it, you can't define the type of granite. And so you're looking for something which is a bit different to whatever you're looking for. And it's like a Where's Wally type cartoon image. And geologists, I think, are particularly good at finding what's not normal. What's the odd thing out? And in our awareness state in the woods and things like that, it's switched on like spidey sense. So you've definitely got that from what you've said just now twice already.
Well, yeah, I think yeah, the campsite that we stayed at a couple of weekends now, up on the hill there's a lake, a small lake, and it's really pretty. And we found this lake one evening, and imagine the temperature's been about 33, 35 degrees centigrade until today. It's finally broken, it's cold, and summer's over. And it's really hot and humid, and Eva says, "Oh, this lake has some kind of special feeling." And she's immediately off to swim in the lake. I won't swim in a lake because I don't know why. It's just one of those things. I won't swim in a lake. So I got my stick out and start
The
dowsing.
Yorkshire thing. Too many of those leeches.
There's a mill line going right through the lake, right? And so we spent quite a lot of time at the lake, and then we kept saying this is such a nice campsite. We went back this weekend specifically because it was the last weekend it was open. We wanted to camp there one more time. Such a nice campsite. And Eva kept saying, "Oh, you should get your rod out and check if there isn't a line, across the campsite." And then yesterday, as we arrived back home, she said, "You know what we didn't do? We didn't check the campsite, whether there was a line there. We keep forgetting to do it." And then she said, "But I think we both know there is a line there."
Yes, yes. Well, you're drawn to them now. You're looking for them. It's like your subconscious is now working on your behalf. That's why you're pulling up in the car, and it's just next door.
Yeah, the number of times that has happened just recently, where you're looking for a line, you park the car, you do a 10-kilometer hike up the bloody hill and down again, you're sweating, and you get back to the car and you're in the line the whole time.
Well, there's a friend of mine, Chris Robinson, who's a dream detective, and he started years ago because he could dream where he was going to be going or what he would see the next day. He's worked for MI5 and military intelligences around the world. He's been tested at universities of Arizona for his ability to see the future. But he did this through his dreams by building symbols up. And I asked him at his house a few years ago, so how did you go about doing this? And he said, "Oh, I just was drawn to drive somewhere, and wherever it felt right, I just pulled over and went to sleep in the back of my van, and I was given the next set of symbols and what it was supposed to be." So he too relied upon being drawn to stay overnight and sleep overnight, probably in a type of line, energy field.
Yeah.
And that's how he accumulated over 1,000 symbols.
Wow.
So that when he dreams of any one of those 1,000 symbols, he knows what he's going to be seeing the next day or two.
Interesting, because I definitely would say the campsites that we camped on this summer we've subsequently found the lines pass through where we were camping, sometimes the Perun line. And, it's amazing how often that happens. Now, I was saying earlier on about the number of lines here in this zone, this like Templar zone. And I just wondered, when you remote dowse anything in this area, and I know you've done it a couple of times because you've asked me to go and investigate, your results. Have you sensed there is a lot of lines here, or have you just seen it as the Templar line?
One of the problems of going into awareness, when you ask the focus conscious question, you go into awareness, is you pick up everything unless your focused question is not good enough. So a lot of part of my questioning is saying what I don't want to see and what I don't want to find.
Right.
So if you're looking to find just the large type 4 alignments or the earth energy lines and nothing else, don't show me anything. Don't show me the shadow lines.
I do that, and these are all type 4s, all of them.
Yeah.
And I don't know anywhere else. I haven't read any account of being so many lines in such a short space. I mean, all along the Templar line, more or less, within a kilometer, you might find 6 or 7 pairs of type 4s. And I know that some of them are coming in and then traveling a little bit along with the Templar and then going out again. the one that you asked me about right out by the German border in the mountains there. That was one that comes in and nodes with the Templar and then goes out the other direction. But it just seems odd to me because I've dowsed in other. I mean, I haven't done the same amount of dowsing work, but I've dowsed in other parts of the Czech Republic and not found any Type 4 lines. Just huge gaps.
Well, Gary, the first thing to say is if you've got a lot of lines in one place, they could easily have been drawn in from the surrounding environment. So you're going to get a gap. For instance, if you look at Avebury, it's a big node in Avebury, but there's no smaller nodes around it for quite some distance because it's pulled it almost in. And I point to the few places I know where there are 4 pairs of Type 4 lines, all crossing over in one place. So you're I'm not saying this is what you've got, but if you've got 4 alignments crossing over, 4 pairs, if they've each now got shadow lines, so that's 8 lines originally.
Yeah.
Multiply that by another 2, that's 16. That's 24 Type 4 lines that if it wasn't a perfect node, you've now got 24 Type 4 lines crossing over in what would be normally a tic-tac-toe.
Yes.
With 2 lines.
Yeah.
But now you've got 4 lines. It would be gracious, quite a bit of a combination. But now you add the shadow lines and unknown density in the geology underneath. You could get a bit of a muddle. So
Yeah.
all I would say is just try and ask not to be seeing the shadow lines to begin with.
That's a good idea.
Try and differentiate between the lines through some form of symbolism. Like you could say, if you label the other lines which aren't the Templar alignments, so you begin to label them with a different name, then your subconscious knows that you're using that name for that particular alignment. So you could then say, well, is this alignment or does this belong to this alignment? That may help you.
Do you know, I don't know why I haven't thought of that, because I actually I'll there's some video that Eva took driving in the van where I've got the rod in one hand and driving with the other, and I'm saying, okay, show me where the Templar line is, and it's somewhere ahead, and I'm saying, okay, is it 2 kilometers or less? Is it 1 kilometer or less? Is it 500 meters? And then we go, it's 500 meters. We go 500 meters, and there we are, found the line. And I do this all the time with the Templar. This is how I track it. But it's never entered my head to name the other lines and then start doing the same thing. Is this because I don't know. Sometimes you get tunnel vision, don't you?
Well, you had a project to map the alignment.
That's
so
right.
Now it's the next stage. Now you've got one under your belt. You've got to find where the other 4 or 5 are.
So what are you up to these days then? Because I saw you were out in the field and doing some dowsing and enjoying yourself.
Well, that was part of the Irish thing. As you know, I was asked to do a couple of talks out there, but it was my chance to also get really close to the land in Ireland. And my wife is Irish anyway; she's got relations over there. Her mother's over there, so we had a chance to explore the land. And I knew where there were alignments, but I hadn't mapped them in the detail, because what you're doing takes a lot of work. Even remotely doing it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And there were 2 areas that I was checking. One was Galway. I knew there was an alignment heading up to Galway, and I knew there was an alignment coming down from Maeve's Cairn going through Knock Shrine, and they were going to cross over somewhere. I didn't actually have time to go and check that area, but I was a bit surprised to find a node in the middle of Galway at the Galway Cathedral. So that was fun. And then we stopped off at Limerick, and on the way I was going to go down to Tipperary, but I got detoured for a bit like you get to take on a detour. And I thought, oh, I'll just go down this sort of route, and popped up this Moor Abbey, which as you saw on the video, which was, and I say it wasn't that I kind of expected there would be the lines there. I didn't necessarily expect there to be a node, but what really shocked me was it was yet another perfect node in the middle of this ruined church, which was like a 13th century friary. So, somebody had been doing something right there recently, is all I can conclude. And that was, and then another beautiful place right on the southeast tip of Ireland, which completely surprised me as well, was Lady Island. And it's a pilgrimage site as it is, but there was a beautiful node there. So Ireland's got so much to offer. So it's a joy. If you ever want to go back, there's just loads of dolmens and standing stones. There's plenty of things to have. So that's what I had a lot of fun with. I do have a project I'm ongoing with. So I'll perhaps talk about next time for you, because I haven't done the dowsing yet. I've done some remote dowsing, but I'll give you a taster. It actually connects with the line that I asked you to check on the west side of Czechia that
Right.
crosses the Templar alignment. It's
Okay.
some work on that line.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm working on the Sacred Path modules, where I'm trying to bring those to fruition. Yeah.
And how's that coming along?
It's a lot more work than I thought it would be, but it's just, like you were saying, that you're immersing yourself in the land and it keeps giving you more. And I try and explain what I mean. When you look at a picture, you get a sense of what you think it means, especially one which has got hidden depth of meaning and symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
You get an idea what it means, and then you share it with other people and you hear their interpretations and you think, wow, I didn't get that. I completely missed it. And this is what the power of the group can do.
Yeah.
So I knew that by taking a group of people through what I'd looked at, I'd get a fresh perspective of it all. And I did initially 3 groups, all through the modules that I'd written initially. All of which I've subsequently improved the questions around what we look at, because we look at Steiner's work, Goethe's work, Jung's work in detail. We look at synchronicity, we look at earth energies, and we look at 14, 15 universal prophecies, which are all talking about the same event. And it takes about 60 weeks to go through, once a week, with a group for about 90 minutes at a time. And apart from the fact that the groups end up being lovely people, it's just lovely working with them. They're just and for me, the idea is you take the group through and then they go off and investigate and do the research on their own group, and that's going so well. But what has been completely blowing my mind is that I've now had 5 groups that I've taken through the first 3 modules. There's another 2 groups, and I'm literally still finding new information coming through from things I've studied 4 times and in 4 groups, and then many hours myself before. I'm thinking, it's almost like going through a forest, and again seeing new things every time you walk through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to a lovely chap called Niels, who's one of the storytellers in Ireland. He tells beautiful stories, an archaeologist who's telling beautiful stories. And he was talking about how what you need to do is not just go to one place in the land once or twice, but to go regularly. And I remembered, that's what I used to do when I walked my dog. There was a place that in Wiltshire called Castle Coombe, and 3 times a week we'd walk our dog in the same routes, the same forest for years.
Yeah.
And we'd see the seasons change it. It was like, we could go back to almost any time of the year. We'd experienced it in all its beauty and differences. And I think until you connect with the land on the beginnings on that level, you're not really ever going to let it affect you. And I think what you've talked earlier about how you've let their land immerse in you, let the myths drift into you, that is when something switches on inside you. And it's a little bit with the groups, when you go over the material again and again and again, because it was this material that was produced by geniuses in the first place. Their inspiration, they tapped into this vein of intuition from their subconscious, and it's like it's still there for us to tap into if we get out of the way.
Well, it's
And I
like
find it fascinating. Sorry.
I mean, I was thinking two thoughts in parallel. One is, how does it feel having studied to be, fairly hard-nosed scientist, pseudoscientist, I guess, or not pseudoscientist, but soft scientist. Geology is a soft science. And then finding yourself essentially creating a course in magic for people, because that's essentially what you've done.
Honestly, Gary, I couldn't have done it, but for the fact I spent 15 years with a chap called Ron Pearson.
Yeah.
Ron is an engineering physicist a
Yeah.
rocket scientist, inventor of the gas wave turbine, and I met him in 1999, and he passed in 2015. And I spent most weekends with him, helping him with his theories on quantum mechanics and quantum gravity. If I hadn't had that real immersion in cosmology and physics and not so much in mathematics, because he was just far too ahead of me for that, but I needed that grounding in the quantum theory and why relativity was so wrong and why it was purposely distracting from the true nature of reality. So it was that investigation, his rigor in looking at what had to be chucked out because and as an independent scientist you can do that. It doesn't fit, chuck it, and move on.
Yeah.
And you're left with a much closer version of reality. But the other thing is you're left with a very difficult way of living with anyone else.
True,
As a
true, true.
scientist in this world, you'll know
Yeah.
we have a much harder way of living with other people because we're very quick to dismiss things. I know your own posts with regards to, well, I'm not sure we can even talk about it. But you and I both know
General
what Ron,
environment, yes.
yes, on the environment. So if I hadn't had that as really what was the grounding support for scientific grounding for philosophy, because literally his investigation into the true nature of reality was crossing over into the dowsing. In fact, we both came across material at the same time, which confirmed his work, and it confirmed the major alignments around the world, the emperor dragons and their nodes, from a French medium. And again, I as you know, I do put a lot of emphasis on synchronicity. You can't
Yeah,
make it better. So when you follow synchronicity, and I came across Ron through synchronicity, there's a message in there for you to follow.
absolutely agree with that.
Explore. Yeah.
My second thought was that we talk about in certain circles talk about the Akashic plane, the idea that all knowledge is within and out there at the same time to be accessed by anybody. And I think your description of this group work and bringing out more and more and more, even though you feel like you've been through it 100 times already, is symptomatic of being tuned into that knowledge, that natural knowledge. And I think to some extent that is partly, and I don't know how to make the connection, but that's partly what's wrong with things today, is that people seem to want to deny what they don't want to accept. And the answer is always right there in front of your nose if you just would listen or pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And when I was writing, I have a course in magic, which is not greatly popular. I think I've had 4 students on the mystical hexagram, but there's a lot of stuff in there. And I, being a trained scientist, when I first started to write that book, it was one of the first books I wrote. I was all the time trying to find sources to quote to back my ideas up. And of course, I couldn't find any. And in the end, I realized I don't need to. This is inner knowledge. This is coming through meditation. This is gnosis, if you want, and it's probably not accurate, but it's something, and it's important to get it down. And I don't need to defend it because other people will.
Yeah.
If other people go through the exercises, they'll experience similar things, and they'll draw more out of that material. So I completely understand what you're talking about. I mean,
Well, what we have is Ron has given us the complete full theory of quantum gravity, which explains how intelligence must have arisen to go on and continually create the world of matter and in the quantum world. And we don't need to question that maths. I mean, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, Sir Brian Josephson of the Cavendish Labs, could not find any fault in his work and said so. Wrote it down and said he just didn't like it because it didn't include relativity. So that's a done deal. We don't have to worry anymore.
Yeah.
But I come back to an early part where you said, I take your mind back to when we studied geology, because you and I were roughly about the same time. One thing about geology back then, which was unlike all the other scientists that were studying at university when I was there in different subjects, we were closer to the forefront of geological knowledge in our third year than all the other sciences, because geology was so new.
Yeah.
We were having conversations at that age as a student undergraduate that were pioneering conversations.
Yeah.
It was electrifying. I loved that those debates that we had, ideas on how things were forming and things like that, with generally teachers, lecturers who were at the forefront of their own game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the research side of that for me in the third year, really, that's why I fell in love with geology. And the two things aspect, I love learning something new still. I'm still massively curious,
Yeah.
but I love the environment where people were free to just chat and discuss, and there was no putting on down, don't be so bloody stupid, things like that. Anything went because it was that brainstorming type environment. And I think when you get back to people back in groups who can share dialogue and not worry about saying something stupid every now and again, because you knew that person would come out with some wild insight that's proving it's just
Yeah.
massively
Yeah. Yeah.
helpful to the
Absolutely.
conversation. And
Yeah.
I miss that.
I agree. I remember going on field trips, and someone like the sedimentology guy, Pete Turner, he would be explaining something he was seeing, and then he would see something else, and he would get Alan Thomas, the paleontologist and also sedimentologist, and they'd start having a conflab whilst we were mucking around. And those of us that were really interested would stick a bit close and have our ear in. And the next thing you'd know is they'd write a paper because they'd made a discovery right there on the bleeding edge of, sedimentation and this kind of thing. And I just found geology, like you say, I mean, plate tectonics was a relatively new thing, for example. So there was all this. Mike Russell, who was professor at Strathclyde when I was there doing my PhD, he was on the bleeding edge of mineralization through these little funnels of
Yeah,
gas escaping at the rift zones, right?
yeah,
And I remember he was using electron microscopy and stuff to try to find these fossil plumes. And when he had the final breakthrough and actually photographed fossil plumes in ore that come from a rift zone, and he had a paper in Nature within about 3 weeks, I think.
wow, wow. I don't know if you remember the name Professor Oxborough, but he
Yeah.
was. I actually met him in the labs in Oxford when I was young, in my teens still, and just meeting somebody who was. This is the guy that was integral in beginning to explain plate tectonics, and so being at the forefront or the cutting edge of research for me was fascinating.
But what
And
geology also did, I think, for me, was it expanded my mind, because unlike other things, you had to be able, if you were going to be a good geologist, you had to see in 3 dimensions or n dimensions. It wasn't good enough to be just able to see in 2 dimensions. You had to know what was happening in depth, right?
mm,
And it's a special skill. I think it can be developed,
yeah,
but it's a
yeah.
special skill.
Well,
And
I was doing that underground in the mines. You
exactly.
literally looked up through the rock and saw where the reef was, and you saw how it was faulted and moved down there, and you're playing with your arms. You'd be sitting at your desk and you'd be doing this. But yeah,
But you see, I think that the leap of using the brain to go from like 2-dimensional to 3 or n-dimensional visualization is a sort of a leap in how you process things and how you see things,
yeah,
that once you've done it, you can't go back.
no,
And I think that it lends itself to things like the esoteric and grasping kind of philosophical concepts and blending it with bleeding edge science, quantum, whatever. And then you start to realize, I mean, I think I know nothing, but on the other hand, I'm pretty certain that, I live in multiple parallel universes, and I have no problem imagining that. But I
well,
think,
I wouldn't go that far. I don't believe it that.
well, I have no problems
Three
imagining
dimensions, one
parallel.
universe. Let's have another
Yeah, I
rubbish.
know, parallel universes. I've no problem at all imagining parallel, not parallel, but overlapping.
Multiple frequencies of matter in the same area.
Overlapping.
Okay.
So like a radio frequency tuning into different frequencies, right?
Oh, happy with that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's my liminal people thing, where certain beings have always existed in parallel with us, but we're not aware of them, but maybe they're aware of us, and it's because they're just in a different on that radio dial, they're a bit further up
Yeah.
or a bit further
Yeah.
down from us.
Yeah.
And so, just to broaden the discussion before we end, when I look at what's going on in the world now, and I was talking to Everett about this at the weekend. I wrote a Substack about it as well. I have no difficulty now imagining that the world is under the control of something that's not necessarily human, although it could be just humans have the potential for great debasement and evil. I don't think there's any doubt about that, especially someone who's been massively wealthy their entire life and has run out of things to give them kicks. They can get to be very malevolent individuals.
Yeah.
But I also believe, there's a chance that there are malevolent beings that we're not necessarily all the time aware of in this lower frequency. And I sound mad but I can in my own mind, I have this ability to sort of see all this, and then I try to explain it to people, and unless you're halfway along already, it's a very difficult thing to explain. But when I look around at what's going on, I can't think of any other explanation that makes sense to me other than, there's this. And I think that makes what we're doing, particularly what you're doing, because I'm just out here on my own playing around, you're actually trying to spread the knowledge and get other people involved, and boy, would I like to do that, but I have a big language barrier. I think it's more important than ever, because the only way, in my mind, there's only 2 or 3 ways you can stop what's going on. And one is creativity, the other one is love, and the other one is closer to nature and getting to learn what nature has to offer and putting us back in our natural habitat, natural environment, and learning what our role really is. And it's a magical, it's almost a godlike role, and we've resigned and gone off in a different direction, and that's not where we're supposed to be at all.
I'd add a couple of things. Integral to creativity and what you're saying is the necessity to have freedom.
Yeah.
And one of the things we hear from a lot of people is that this is a planet of choice where we have to have choice. And Finnish Schlemmer's Council of Nine, this message was quite clear. Here we have this ability to choose, and it's important that we have that choice, because then we can decide whether to go to the dark side or the light side. And I think we're in a spiritual struggle right now.
Yeah.
However, even the bad guys, if you like, the pedophiles, all the power people, what I call them the neo-Frankist thinking globalists, from previous newsletters, because it's a completely inverse way of thinking. This after this complete madman called Jacob Frank. But when we lose our ability to have any freedom, we lose our choice. If we lose our choice, we can't learn, develop, and grow. And if we can't learn, develop, and grow, then the whole raison d'etre for our world has ceased to be of any use.
Yeah.
That, for me, is a bit like the Star Trek breaking the Prime Directive. The intelligence behind the universe, the higher beings, are never going to let that happen, because that's going against the Prime Directive. And I see evidence now of much more support for the spiritual struggle, building and growing in the world, because there's something awakening amongst people now that are realizing that what's going on is not right, and it's been completely unstoppable, and it will crescendo.
I agree. Absolutely agree.
And for me, just the last line for me, the more people we can get back into nature, to connect to what nature is showing us, that it's showing us the way. And to think that we can do it on ourselves right now is really just a sign that we think we still got the ego. And the ego is at the end of the individual consciousness. We're moving back to group consciousness. We must recognize we're part of the oneness. We can start by coming together in groups. We can gather and choose to seek a different route, not confrontationally, but through connecting spiritually. And I think all the information is coming forward to help us do this now from many different sources, including what you're doing, walking with the land and remembering the myths and finding it's transforming you and ever as well. This is what it's finding. It's transforming the people in Ireland when they lost their connection to religion. It was part of their whole year, and it was, they had a farming year which was timed out with seasons, and they had a religious year which was timed out with ceremonies, but then the religious year got taken away and they were left with the farm and the land, and all they had was their myths and legends, and they immersed themselves back into the land because it was so fresh in their memory. And now Ireland is awakening faster than probably all other European nations. And so what we're doing is literally, I'm hoping, just showing people, look, this is what the land can do for us. There's one other thing which you touched on it earlier, which is important, and that is that we're being taught patience.
Yeah.
We're not being rushed into these transformations. There's no this need to get things changed quickly is just the fears they're trying to put us under. And I think that the coming transformation will be decades in the making, but it'll get better every year from next year onwards, I'm quite sure. Yeah.
Let's say that it will. Be positive. Well, it's good, Rory. Thanks. I'm going to switch this off now. And
thank you, Gary.